Catastrophic Disasters thread. Natural/man-made disasters are allowed. On January 28, 1986, the NASA Shuttle Orbiter mission STS-51L and the 10th flight of Space Shuttle Challenger, OV-99, broke apart 73 seconds into its flight, killing all 7 crew members, which consisted of 5 NASA astronauts and 2 payload specialists. The spacecraft disintegrated over the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Cape Canaveral, Florida, at 11:39 EST, 16:39 UTC. The disintegration of the vehicle began after a joint in its right solid rocket booster, SRB, failed at liftoff. The failure was caused by the failure of O-ring seals used in the joint that were not designed to handle the unusually cold conditions that existed at this launch. The seals' failure caused a breach in the SRB joint, allowing pressurized burning gas from within the solid rocket motor to reach the outside and impinge upon the adjacent SRB aft field joint attachment hardware and external fuel tank. This led to the separation of the right-hand SRB's aft field joint attachment and the structural failure of the external tank. Aerodynamic forces broke up the orbiter. The Kursk submarine disaster, the sinking of the Oscar-class submarine, Russian, Project 949 AAE, Kursk, took place. During the first major Russian naval exercise in more than 10 years, in the Barents Sea on August 12, 2000, killing all 118 personnel on board. Nearby ships registered the initial explosion and a second, much larger, explosion 2 minutes and 15 seconds later, which was powerful enough to register on seismographs as far away as Alaska. The Russian Navy did not realize that the sub had sunk and did not halt the exercise or initiate a search for it for more than 6 hours. Because the sub's emergency rescue buoy had been intentionally disabled, it took more than 16 hours for them to locate the sunken boat. Over 4 days, the Russian Navy used 4 different diving bells and submersibles to try to attach to the escape hatch without success. The Navy's response was criticized as slow and inept. The government initially misled and manipulated the public and media about the timing of the accident, stating that communication had been established and that a rescue effort was underway, and refused help from other governments. On the 5th day, President Vladimir Putin authorized the Navy to accept British and Norwegian offers of assistance. 7 days after the submarine went down, Norwegian divers finally opened a hatch to the escape trunk in the boat's 9th compartment, hoping to locate survivors, but found it flooded. The Johnstown flood, locally, the Great Flood of 1889, occurred on May 31, 1889, after the catastrophic failure of the South Fork Dam on the Little Conemaugh River 14 miles, 23 kilometers, upstream of the town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The dam broke after several days of extremely heavy rainfall, releasing 14.55 million cubic meters of water. With a volumetric flow rate that temporarily equaled the average flow rate of the Mississippi River, 2,209 people, according to one account, lost their lives, and the flood accounted for $17 million of damage, about $463 million in 2017 dollars. The mines in the Battle of Messines comprised a series of underground explosive charges, secretly planted by British tunneling units beneath the German Fourth Army lines near the village of Messen in Belgian West Flanders during the First World War. The mines were detonated at the start of the Battle of Messines, 7 to 14 June 1917, creating 19 large craters. The joint explosion of the mines at Messines ranks among the largest non-nuclear explosions of all time. The evening before the attack, General Sir Charles Harrington, Chief of Staff of the Second Army, General Sir Herbert Plumer, remarked to the press, "Gentlemen, I don't know whether we are going to make history tomorrow, but at any rate we shall change geography." The detonation of the mines resulted in the deaths of 10,000 German soldiers. On February 1, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere, killing all 7 crew members. The disaster was the second fatal accident in the Space Shuttle program after Space Shuttle Challenger, which broke apart and killed the 7-member crew 73 seconds after liftoff in 1986. During the launch of STS-107, Columbia's 28th mission, a piece of foam insulation broke off from the Space Shuttle external tank and struck the left wing of the orbiter. A few previous shuttle launches had seen damage ranging from minor to nearly catastrophic from foam shedding, but some engineers suspected that the damage to Columbia was more serious. NASA managers limited the investigation, reasoning that the crew could not have fixed the problem if it had been confirmed. When Columbia re-entered the atmosphere of Earth, the damage allowed hot atmospheric gases to penetrate the heat shield and destroy the internal wing structure, which caused the spacecraft to become unstable and break apart. Soyuz 11, Russian, Ko-0311, Union 11, was the only manned mission to board the world's first space station, Salyut 1. Soyuz 10 had soft-docked but had not been able to enter due to latching problems. The mission arrived at the space station on June 7, 1971 and departed on June 29. The mission ended in disaster when the crew capsule depressurized during preparations for re-entry, killing the 3-man crew. The Soyuz 11 crew members were Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. The 3 crew members of Soyuz 11 are the only humans known to have died in space. The Chernobyl disaster, also referred to as the Chernobyl accident, was a catastrophic nuclear accident. It occurred on 25 to 26 April 1986 in the No. 4 light-water graphite moderated reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the now-abandoned town of Pripyat, in northern Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Soviet Union, approximately 104 kilometers 65 miles north of Kiev. The disaster resulted in 31 direct deaths and at least 15 fatalities in the years afterwards. On March 27, 1977, 2 Boeing 747 passenger jets, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, collided on the runway at Los Rodeos Airport, now Tenerife North Airport, on the Spanish island of Tenerife, Canary Islands, killing 583 people, making it the deadliest accident in aviation history. A terrorist incident at Gran Canaria Airport had caused many flights to be diverted to Los Rodeos, including the 2 aircraft involved in the accident. The airport quickly became congested with parked airplanes blocking the only taxiway and forcing departing aircraft to taxi on the runway instead. Patches of thick fog were drifting across the airfield, so that the aircraft and control tower were unable to see one another. The collision occurred when KLM 4805 initiated its takeoff run while Pan Am 1736, shrouded in fog, was still on the runway and about to turn off onto the taxiway. The impact and resulting fire killed everyone on board the KLM plane and most of the occupants of the Pan Am plane, with only 61 survivors in the front section of the aircraft. Byford Dolphin Diving Bell Accident. On November 5, 1983 at 4 a.m., while drilling in the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, 4 divers were in a decompression chamber system attached by a trunk, a short passage, to a diving bell on the rig. The divers were Edwin Coward, British, 35 years old, Roy Lucas, British, 38, Bjørn Javer Bergersen, Norwegian, 29, and Truls Hellevik, Norwegian, 34. They were assisted by 2 dive tenders, Cramond and Saunders. Hellevik was about to close the door between the chamber system and the trunk when the chamber explosively decompressed from a pressure of 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere. One of the tenders, 32-year-old William Cramond of Great Britain, and all 4 of the divers were killed instantly. The other tender, Saunders, was severely injured. Pick-related is Hellevik. The Halifax explosion. The Halifax explosion took place on December 6, 1917 when a cargo ship loaded with explosives collided with another ship in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. It was the largest man-made explosion before the development of nuclear weapons. An area over 400 acres was instantly destroyed, including the entire neighborhood of Richmond. There was barely a single glass window in Halifax that survived the blast. Halifax citizens had gathered on the street to watch the spectacular fire beforehand. 1,600 people were killed instantly. Other people stood at the windows of their homes or businesses and were blinded by broken glass fragments or by the flash when the explosion occurred. You leave out the best part. Both that reactor and the reactor at Fukushima had gone critical. There is no way to bring a reactor back from that point, and both entire countries should have been irradiated. But in both instances a cylinder-shaped craft was reported by dozens or hundreds of witnesses to have hovered over the reactor, and then appeared to fire a red beam directly into the critical reactor before flying off at a high rate of speed. There are pics of the craft over the reactor. Immediately after leaving, the radiation levels plummeted and the reactor left its critical state. 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. It was the deadliest tsunami in recorded history. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake occurred at 58 minutes and 53 seconds UTC on December 26, with an epicenter off the west coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, and a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3. It was an undersea megathrust earthquake caused by rupture along the fault between the Burma Plate and the subducting Indian Plate. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake triggered a series of devastating tsunamis up to 30 meters, 100 feet, high, inundating coastal communities along the coasts of the Indian Ocean and killing an estimated 227,898 people in 14 countries. The earthquake was one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, the deadliest of the 21st century so far. Indonesia was the hardest hit country, followed by Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand. Around 30 minutes after the quake, the first tsunami struck the northern tip of Indonesia, killing around 130,000 people. 30 minutes, 130,000 lives gone. Think about that total number, 227,898 people died. Interestingly, it was really the first time there were actual photos and videos of a tsunami in action. Many tourists had no fucking idea why the ocean suddenly receded that day or what was coming towards them. Pan Am Flight 103 was a regularly scheduled Pan Am transatlantic flight from Frankfurt to Detroit via London and New York. On December 21, 1988, and 7:39 p.m., the aircraft operating the transatlantic leg of the route was destroyed by a bomb, killing all 243 passengers and 16 crew in what became known as the Lockerbie bombing. Large sections of the aircraft crashed onto residential areas of Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 11 more people on the ground. Following a 3-year joint investigation by Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary and the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, arrest warrants were issued for 2 Libyan nationals in November 1991. In 1999, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi handed over the 2 men for trial at Camp Zeist, Netherlands, after protracted negotiations and UN sanctions. In 2001, Libyan intelligence officer Abdel Basset al-Migrahi was jailed for life after being found guilty of 270 counts of murder in connection with the bombing. In August 2009, he was released by the Scottish government on compassionate grounds after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. He died in May 2012, as the only person to be convicted for the attack. The Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900 killed around 10,000 people in southeast Texas, USA. The 1961 Goldsboro B-52 crash was an accident that occurred near Goldsboro, North Carolina on January 24, 1961. A B-52 Stratofortress carrying 2 3-4 megaton Mark 39 nuclear bombs broke up in mid-air, dropping its nuclear payload in the process. The pilot in command ordered the crew to eject at 9,000 feet, 2,700 m. 5 men successfully ejected or bailed out of the aircraft and landed safely. Another ejected but did not survive the landing, and 2 died in the crash. Information newly declassified in 2013 showed that one of the bombs came very close to detonating. The Philips disaster was a devastating series of explosions and fire on October 23, 1989, originating at the Phillips 66 Company's Houston Chemical Complex, HCC, facility near the Houston Ship Channel in Pasadena, Texas, United States. The initial blast registered 3.5 on the Richter scale, and the conflagration took 10 hours to bring under control. The explosions killed 23 employees and injured 314. The Flicksboro disaster was an explosion at a chemical plant close to the village of Flicksboro, North Lincolnshire, England on Saturday, June 1, 1974. It killed 28 people and seriously injured 36 out of a total of 72 people on site at the time. The Tunguska event was a large explosion that occurred near the Stony Tunguska River in Yeniseisk Governorate, now Krasnoyarsk Krai, Russia, on the morning of June 30, 1908. On June 30, 1908, at around 7:17 local time, Evenki natives and Russian settlers in the hills northwest of Lake Baikal observed a column of bluish light, nearly as bright as the sun, moving across the sky. About 10 minutes later, there was a flash and a sound similar to artillery fire. Eyewitnesses closer to the explosion reported that the source of the sound moved from the east to the north of them. The sounds were accompanied by a shock wave that knocked people off their feet and broke windows hundreds of kilometers away. The majority of witnesses reported only the sounds and tremors, and did not report seeing the explosion. The explosion registered at seismic stations across Eurasia. It is estimated that, in some places, the resulting shock wave was equivalent to an earthquake measuring 5.0 on the Richter magnitude scale. It also produced fluctuations in atmospheric pressure strong enough to be detected in Great Britain. Over the next few days, night skies in Asia and Europe were aglow. It has been theorized that this was due to light passing through high-altitude ice particles that had formed at extremely low temperatures, a phenomenon that many years later would be produced by space shuttles. It is estimated that the Tunguska explosion knocked down some 80 million trees over an area of 2,150 square kilometers, 830 square miles, and that the shock wave from the blast would have measured 5.0 on the Richter magnitude scale. YouTube link to Tunguska documentary. The Goiânia accident was a radioactive contamination accident that occurred on September 13, 1987, at Goiânia, in the Brazilian state of Goiás, after a forgotten radiotherapy source was taken from an abandoned hospital site in the city. It was subsequently handled by many people, resulting in 4 deaths. About 112,000 people were examined for radioactive contamination and 249 were found to have significant levels of radioactive material in or on their bodies. Came very close to detonating. Close to a conventional, uncontrolled detonation which would not have set off a nuclear blast, or close to a controlled, full nuclear blast, I wonder? In this case, Wikipedia link to 1966 Palomares B-52 crash. There were conventional blasts, but uncontrolled, so not a full nuclear blast. Still contaminated the land though. Only one of the bombs came very close to setting off a nuclear explosion, PIC related. As it turned out, there were only 4 switches instead of the previous claim of 6. Only a single switch had not been armed. Might help if I included the image. February 1, 2000, Sametprkin radiation accident. The radiation source of an expired teletherapy unit was purchased and transferred without registration, and stored in an unguarded car park in Sametprkin, Thailand without warning signs. It was then stolen from the car park and dismantled in a junkyard for scrap metal. Workers completely removed the 60Co source from the lead shielding, and became ill shortly thereafter. The radioactive nature of the metal and the resulting contamination was not discovered until 18 days later. 7 injuries and 3 deaths were a result of this incident. The Demon core was a 6.2 kilogram, 14 pounds, subcritical mass of plutonium measuring 89 millimeters, 3.5 in diameter, which was involved in 2 criticality accidents. The core was slated for use in a Third World War II nuclear bomb, but remained in use for testing after Japan's surrender. It was designed with a small safety margin to ensure a successful explosion of the bomb. The device briefly went supercritical when it was accidentally placed in supercritical configurations during two separate experiments intended to guarantee the core was indeed close to the critical point. The incidents happened at the Los Alamos laboratory in 1945 and 1946, and resulted in the acute radiation poisoning and subsequent deaths of scientists Harry Dacklian and Louis Slotin. After these incidents, the spherical plutonium core was referred to as the Demon Core. October 13, 1960, Barents Sea, Arctic Ocean, release of nuclear materials. A leak developed in the steam generators and in a pipe leading to the compensator reception on the ill-fated K-8 while the Soviet Northern Fleet November-class submarine was on exercise. While the crew rigged an improvised cooling system, radioactive gases leaked into the vessel and 3 of the crew suffered visible radiation injuries according to radiological experts in Moscow. Some crew members had been exposed to doses of up to 1.8 to 2 SV, 180 to 200 rem. 52 crewmen died. January 3, 1961, National Reactor Testing Station, Idaho, U.S., accidental criticality, steam explosion, 3 fatalities, release of fission products during a maintenance shutdown. The SL-1 experimental nuclear reactor underwent a prompt critical reaction causing core materials to explosively vaporize. Water hammer estimated at 10,000 pounds per square inch, 69,000 kPa, struck the top of the reactor vessel, propelling the entire reactor vessel upwards over 9 feet, 2.7 m, in the air. One operator who had been standing on top of the vessel was killed when a shield plug impaled him and pinned him to the ceiling. 2 other military personnel were also killed from the trauma of the explosion, one of which had removed the central control rod too far. The plant had to be dismantled and the contamination was buried permanently nearby. Most of the release of radioactive materials was concentrated within the reactor building. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a scheduled domestic Japan Airlines passenger flight from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka International Airport, Japan. On Monday, August 12, 1985, a Boeing 747SR operating this route suffered a sudden decompression 12 minutes into the flight and crashed in the area of Mount Takamagahara, Ueno, Gunma Prefecture, 100 kilometers, 62 miles, from Tokyo 32 minutes later. The crash site was on Asutaka Ridge, near Mount Asutaka. Japan's Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission officially concluded that the rapid decompression was caused by a faulty repair after a tail strike incident during a landing at Osaka Airport 7 years earlier. A doubler plate on the rear bulkhead of the plane had been improperly repaired, compromising the plane's airworthiness. Cabin pressurization continued to expand and contract the improperly repaired bulkhead until the day of the accident, when the faulty repair finally failed, causing the rapid decompression that ripped off a large portion of the tail and caused the loss of hydraulic controls to the entire plane. Casualties of the crash included all 15 crew members and 505 of the 509 passengers. Some passengers survived the initial crash but subsequently died of their injuries hours later, mostly due to delays in the rescue operation. It remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history, the second deadliest Boeing 747 accident and the second deadliest aviation accident after the 1977 Tenerife airport disaster. 2015 Tianjin explosions. On August 12, 2015, a series of explosions killed 173 people and injured hundreds of others at a container storage station at the port of Tianjin. The first 2 explosions occurred within 30 seconds of each other. The second explosion was far larger and involved the detonation of about 800 tons of ammonium nitrate. Fires caused by the initial explosions continued to burn uncontrolled throughout the weekend, resulting in 8 additional explosions on August 15. The cause of the explosions was not immediately known, but an investigation concluded in February 2016 that an overheated container of dry nitrocellulose was the cause of the initial explosion. Links to reports of the explosions. Wilhelm Gustloff, the German KDF flagship sank after being hit by 3 torpedoes fired by the Soviet submarine S-13 on January 30, 1945 in the Baltic. 5,348 are known dead, but it has been estimated that up to 9,400 were killed, making it possibly the worst single ship loss of life in history. Most of those killed were German civilians, military personnel, and Nazi officials being evacuated from East Prussia. 903 survivors were rescued. HMT Lancastria, sunk by German aircraft in June 1940, with at least 4,000 deaths, possibly thousands more. 2,477 survived and 1,738 known dead. 6,000 people are known to have boarded, but many boarded later, and a total of up to 9,000 has been proposed. The Black Mesa incident was a catastrophic event caused by an experiment carried out at the Black Mesa Research Facility. The experiment triggered a resonance cascade, which allowed numerous extraterrestrial creatures to teleport into the facility and wreak havoc upon its personnel. The ensuing conflict between United States military forces and the alien creatures resulted in the complete destruction of the facility and the death of almost all of its employees. October 1988, at the Nuclear Trigger Assembly Facility at Rocky Flats in Colorado, 2 employees and a DOE inspector inhaled radioactive particles, causing closure of the plant. Several safety violations were cited, including uncalibrated monitors, inadequate fire equipment, and groundwater contaminated with radioactivity. Managers at Rocky Flats did not always follow the rulebook in making decisions. In 1952, for example, they settled a dispute with rancher Marcus Church by giving him keys to fence locks and allowing him to move cattle through the top-secret plant. "Cattle can't talk," one employee said, noting that Church only moved his cattle a few times. Nobody said anything, although it didn't get back to Washington, where they'd make a big deal out of it. In 1968, 4 nuclear submarines vanished. The Israeli submarine Instacar, the French submarine Minerve, the US submarine USS Scorpion, and most famously, USSR submarine K-129. Wikipedia link regarding military subs vanishing. The Capron disaster was a fire that occurred in an ascending train in the tunnel of the Glitzscherben Capron 2 funicular in Capron, Austria, on November 11, 2000. The disaster claimed the lives of 155 people, 150 on the ascending train, 2 on the descending train and 3 in the mountain station. There were 12 survivors, 10 Germans and 2 Austrians, from the burning ascending train. Most of the victims were skiers on their way to the Keats-Steinhorn Glacier. On Friday, June 24, 1994, a United States Air Force, U.S. Air Force, Boeing B-52 Stratofortress crashed at Fairchild Air Force Base, Washington, United States, after its pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Bud Holland, maneuvered the bomber beyond its operational limits and lost control. The B-52 stalled, fell to the ground and exploded, killing Holland and the 3 other field-grade officers on board the aircraft. The Tarata bombing was a terrorist attack in Lima, Peru, on July 16, 1992, by the Shining Path terrorist group. The blast was the deadliest Shining Path bombing during the internal conflict in Peru and was part of a larger bombing campaign in the city. The explosions happened on Avenida Larco, in the business area of Miraflores, an upscale district of the city. 2 trucks, each packed with 1,000 kilograms of explosives, exploded on the street at 9:15 p.m. outside the Central Bank of Peru, killing 25 and wounding 155. The blast destroyed or damaged 183 homes, 400 businesses, and 63 parked cars. The bombings were the beginning of a week-long Shining Path strike against the Peruvian government, a strike which caused 40 deaths and shut down much of the capital. In the wake of the incident, galvanized by public outrage, President Alberto Fujimori intensified his crackdown on Peruvian insurgent groups. The bombing of Guernica was an aerial bombing of the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. It was carried out, at the behest of Francisco Franco's nationalist government, by its allies, the Nazi German Luftwaffe's Condor Legion and the fascist Italian Aviazione Legionaria, under the code name Operation Ruggen. The town was being used as a communications center behind the front line. The operation opened the way to Franco's capture of Bilbao and his victory in northern Spain. The attack gained controversy because it involved the bombing of civilians by a military air force. The number of victims is still disputed. The Basque government reported 1,654 people killed at the time, while local historians identified 126 victims, later revised by the authors of the study to 153. A British source used by the Air War College claims 400 civilians died. Soviet archives claim 800 deaths on May 1, 1937, but this number may not include victims who later died of their injuries in hospitals or whose bodies were discovered buried in the rubble. The Oklahoma City bombing was a domestic terrorist truck bombing on the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, United States on April 19, 1995. Perpetrated by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, the bombing happened at 9:02 a.m. and killed at least 168 people, injured more than 680 others, and destroyed one-third of the building. The blast destroyed or damaged 324 other buildings within a 16-block radius, shattered glass in 258 nearby buildings, and destroyed or burned 86 cars, causing an estimated $652 million worth of damage. Extensive rescue efforts were undertaken by local, state, federal, and worldwide agencies in the wake of the bombing, and substantial donations were received from across the country. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, activated 11 of its urban search and rescue task forces, consisting of 665 rescue workers who assisted in rescue and recovery operations. Until the September 11 attacks in 2001, the Oklahoma City bombing was the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil and remains the deadliest incident of domestic terrorism in United States history. In international human rights law, a forced disappearance, or enforced disappearance, occurs when a person is secretly abducted or imprisoned by a state or political organization or by a third party with the authorization, support, or acquiescence of a state or political organization. Followed by a refusal to acknowledge the person's fate and whereabouts, with the intent of placing the victim outside the protection of the law. On August 9, 2018, Saudi Arabian expeditionary aircraft bombed a civilian school bus passing through a crowded market in Dayan, Saada Governorate, Yemen, near the border with Saudi Arabia. At least 29 children were killed, all under 15 years old and most under age 10. As many as 51 people may have been killed in the attack. In April 1993, Thomas Levy was caught while trying to smuggle 130 grams of ricin from Alaska into Canada. Levy stated that he purchased the ricin to poison coyotes on his farm in Arkansas and keep them away from his chickens. Levy was stopped at the Beaver Creek border crossing by Canadian custom agents who found, along with the 130 grams of ricin, $89,000, a knife, 4 guns, and 20,000 rounds of ammunition. The Tokyo subway sarin attack was an act of domestic terrorism perpetrated on March 20, 1995, in Tokyo, Japan, by members of the cult movement Aum Shinrikyo. In 5 coordinated attacks, the perpetrators released sarin on 3 lines of the Tokyo Metro, then part of the Tokyo subway, during rush hour, killing 12 people, severely injuring 50, some of whom later died, and causing temporary vision problems for nearly 1,000 others. The attack was directed against trains passing through Kazumagaseki and Niigata-ko, where the Diet, Japanese parliament, is headquartered in Tokyo. The group, led by Shoko Asahara, had already carried out several assassinations and terrorist attacks using sarin, including the Matsumoto sarin attack 9 months earlier. They had also produced several other nerve agents, including VX, and attempted to produce botulinum toxin and had perpetrated several failed acts of bioterrorism. Asaira had been made aware of a police raid scheduled for March 22 and had planned the Tokyo subway attack in order to hinder police investigations into the cult and perhaps spark the apocalypse they believed in. In the raid following the attack, police arrested many senior members of the cult. Police activity continued throughout the summer, and over 200 members were arrested, including Asaira. 13 of the senior Ahum management were sentenced to death, with many others given prison sentences up to life. The attack remains the deadliest terrorist incident in Japan. Apollo 1, initially designated as 204, was the first manned mission of the United States Apollo program, the program to land the first men on the Moon. Planned as the first low Earth orbital test of the Apollo Command/Service Module with a crew, to launch on February 21, 1967. The mission never flew. A cabin fire during a launch rehearsal test at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station Launch Complex 34 on January 27 killed all 3 crew members: command pilot Virgil I. Gus Grissom, senior pilot Ed White, and pilot Roger B. Chaffee, and destroyed the command module, CM. The name Apollo 1, chosen by the crew, was officially retired by NASA in commemoration of them on April 24, 1967. Movement by the astronauts was detected by the spacecraft's inertial measurement unit and the astronauts' biomedical sensors, and also indicated by increases in oxygen spacesuit flow, and sounds from Grissom's stuck-open microphone. There was no evidence to identify the movement, or whether it was related to the fire. The stuck microphone was part of a problem with the communications loop connecting the crew, the operations and checkout building, and the complex 34 blockhouse control room. The poor communications led Grissom to remark, "How are we going to get to the Moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?" The simulated countdown was held again at 5:40 p.m. while attempts were made to troubleshoot the communications problem. All countdown functions up to the simulated internal power transfer had been successfully completed by 6:20 p.m., but at 6:30 the count remained on hold at T-10 minutes. The crew members were using the time to run through their checklist again, when a momentary increase in AC bus 2 voltage occurred. 9 seconds later, at 6:31:04.7, one of the astronauts, some listeners and laboratory analysis indicate Grissom, exclaimed "Hey!" or "Fire!" This was followed by 2 seconds of scuffling sounds through Grissom's open microphone. This was immediately followed at 6:31:06.2 by someone, believed by most listeners, and supported by laboratory analysis, to be Chaffee, saying, "We've got a fire in the cockpit." After 6.8 seconds of silence, a second, badly garbled transmission occurred. Interpreted by various listeners as, "They're fighting a bad fire, let's get out, open ER up. We've got a bad fire, let's get out. We're burning up," or, "I'm reporting a bad fire, I'm getting out." This transmission, believed by some listeners to be White, lasted 5.0 seconds and ended with a cry of pain. Pig-related. Satellite pic of smoke over Tasman Sea. The Black Saturday bushfires were a series of bushfires that ignited or were burning across the Australian state of Victoria on and around Saturday, February 7, 2009, and were Australia's all-time worst bushfire disasters. The fires occurred during extreme bushfire weather conditions and resulted in Australia's highest ever loss of life from a bushfire. 180 people died and 414 were injured as a result of the fires. On January 15, 1919, Boston suffered a devastating flood of molasses. The Great Molasses Flood tore through the city's north end and deposited so much gooey residue that locals claimed they could still smell the molasses on warm days decades later. The Purity Distilling Company had built the gigantic tank in Boston's north end in 1915 to supply its booze-making operations. The steel tank was 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, and capable of holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses. Although Prohibition kicked in with Nebraska's ratification of the 18th Amendment the very next day after the 1919 disaster, they still had a license to distill alcohol for industrial applications. The tank was nearly full on January 15, thanks to a recent infusion of 2.3 million gallons of molasses from Puerto Rico. Just after noon, witnesses later recalled hearing a noise like gunfire as the tank's rivets popped and the steel sides ripped open. Suddenly, 26 million pounds of molasses were tearing down Commercial Street in a 15-foot wave. It sounds like something from a cartoon, but the surging molasses was a shockingly destructive force. The wave moved at upwards of 35 miles per hour, and the power was sufficient to rip buildings off of their foundations. The molasses snapped the support girders from an elevated train track and smashed multiple houses. Property damage totaled around $100 million in today's dollars. The wave of molasses moved so quickly and so forcefully that anyone who was unlucky enough to be in its way didn't stand much of a chance. They were either knocked over and crushed or drowned in the goo. The flood claimed 21 lives, and another 150 people suffered injuries. Any flood would have been disastrous, but the viscous nature of molasses made rescue attempts even trickier. Medics and police officers arrived on the scene quickly but had to slog through waist-deep goo to reach victims. The Heysel Stadium disaster occurred on May 29, 1985 when mostly Juventus fans, escaping from a breach by Liverpool fans, were pressed against a collapsing wall in the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, Belgium, before the start of the 1985 European Cup final between the Italian and English clubs. 39 people, mostly Italians and Juventus fans, were killed and 600 were injured in the confrontation. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, also called Miracle of the Andes or Spanish El Milagro de los Andes, flight of an airplane chartered by a Uruguayan amateur rugby team that crashed in the Andes Mountains in Argentina on October 13, 1972, the wreckage of which was not located for more than 2 months. Of the 45 people aboard the plane, only 16 survived the ordeal. The incident garnered international attention, especially after it was revealed that the survivors had resorted to cannibalism. Southern Airways Flight 932 was a chartered Southern Airways Douglas DC-9 domestic United States commercial jet flight from Stallings Field, ISO, in Kinston, North Carolina, to Huntington Tri-State Airport/Milton J. Ferguson Field, HTS, in Cerrado, West Virginia. At 7:36 p.m. on November 14, 1970, the aircraft crashed into a hill just short of the Tri-State Airport, killing all 75 people on board. The plane was carrying 37 members of the Marshall University Thundering Herd football team, 8 members of the coaching staff, 25 boosters, and 5 flight crew members. The team was returning home after a 17-14 loss to the East Carolina Pirates at Ficklin Stadium in Greenville, North Carolina. The Cavalese cable car disaster of 1998, also called the Strage del Sermis massacre at Sermis, occurred on February 3, 1998, near the Italian town of Cavalese, a ski resort in the Dolomites some 40 kilometers 25 miles northeast of Trento. 20 people died when a United States Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler aircraft, while flying too low, against regulations, in order for the pilots to have fun and take videos of the scenery, cut a cable supporting a gondola of an aerial tramway. Joseph Schweitzer, one of the 2 American pilots, confessed in 2012 that he had burned the tape containing incriminating evidence upon returning to the American base. The pilot, Captain Richard J. Ashby, and his navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, were put on trial in the United States and were found not guilty of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide. Later they were found guilty of obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman for having destroyed a videotape recorded from the plane and were dismissed from the Marine Corps. The disaster, and the subsequent acquittal of the pilots, strained relations between the United States and Italy. On October 17, 1989, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake hit the San Francisco Bay Area, killing 67 people and causing more than $5 billion in damages.
At 9:12 a.m., the ammonium nitrate reached an explosive threshold from the combination of heat and pressure. The vessel then detonated, causing great destruction and damage throughout the port. The tremendous breast sent a 15-foot, 4.5 m, wave that was detectable nearly 100 miles, 160 kilometers, off the Texas shoreline. The blast leveled nearly 1,000 buildings on land. The Grand Kemp explosion destroyed the Monsanto Chemical Company plant and resulted in ignition of refineries and chemical tanks on the waterfront. Falling nyres of burning twine from the ship's cargo added to the damage while the Grand Kemp's anchor was hurled across the city. 2 sightseeing airplanes flying nearby had their decks shorn off, 6 forcing them out of the sky. 10 miles, 16 kilometers, away, people in Galveston were forced to their knees. People felt the shock 250 miles, 400 kilometers, away in Louisiana. 7. The explosion blew almost 6,350 short tons, 5,760 metric tons, of the ship's steel into the air, some at supersonic speed. Official casualty estimates came to a total of 567, including all the crewmen who remained aboard the Grand Camp. All but 1 member of the 28 Mangina, Texas City Volunteer Fire Department were killed in the initial explosion on the docks while fighting the shipboard fire. With fires raging throughout Texas City, first responders from other areas were initially unable to reach the site of the disaster. The first explosion ignited ammonium nitrate in the nearby cargo ship High Flyer. The crews spent hours attempting to cut the High Flyer free from her anchor and other obstacles, without success. After smoke had been pouring from the hold for over 5 hours, and about 15 hours after the explosions aboard the Grand Camp, the High Flyer exploded, demolishing the nearby SS Wilson Bilbo Keene, killing at least 2 more and increasing the damage to the port and other ships with more shrapnel and burning material. The 1,883 eruption ejected approximately 25 cubic kilometers, 6 cubic miles, of rock. The cataclysmic explosion was heard 3,600 kilometers, 2,200 miles, away in Alice Springs, as well as on the island of Rodriguez near Mauritius, 4,780 kilometers, 2,970 miles to the west. According to the official records of the Dutch East Indies colony, 165 villages and towns were destroyed near Krakatoa, and 132 were seriously damaged. At least 36,417 people died, and many more thousands were injured, mostly from the tsunamis that followed the explosion. The eruption destroyed 2/3 of the island of Krakatoa. SS Edmund Fitzgerald was an American Great Lakes freighter that sank in a Lake Superior storm on November 10, 1975, with the loss of the entire crew of 29. When launched on June 7, 1958, she was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes, and she remains the largest to have sunk there. Helios Airways Flight 522 was a scheduled passenger flight from Larnaca, Cyprus, to Athens, Greece, that crashed on August 14, 2005, killing all 121 passengers and crew on board. A loss of cabin pressurization incapacitated the crew, leaving the aircraft flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and descended into the ground near Grammatico, Greece. 2 F-16 fighter aircraft from the Hellenic Air Force 111th Combat Wing were scrambled from Nia Anchialos Air Base to establish visual contact. They intercepted the passenger jet at 11:24 and observed that the first officer was slumped motionless at the controls and the captain's seat was empty. They also reported that oxygen masks were dangling in the passenger cabin. Forgot picture because am challenge. On June 17, 1958, while working on the Second Narrows Bridge in Vancouver, a crane stretched from the north side of the new bridge to join the 2 chords of the unfinished arch. Several spans collapsed. 79 workers plunged 30 meters, 100 feet, into the water. 18 were killed either instantly or shortly thereafter, possibly drowned by their heavy tool belts. A diver searching for bodies drowned later, bringing the total fatalities for the collapse to 19. In a subsequent Royal Commission inquiry, the bridge collapse was attributed to miscalculation by bridge engineers. A temporary arm, holding the fifth anchor span, was deemed too light to bear the weight. On October 25, 1999, a chartered Learjet 35 was scheduled to fly from Orlando, Florida, to Dallas, Texas. Early in the flight, the aircraft, which was climbing to its assigned altitude on autopilot, quickly lost cabin pressure and all on board were incapacitated due to hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. The aircraft continued climbing past its assigned altitude, then failed to make the westward turn toward Dallas over North Florida and continued on its northwestern course, flying over the southern and midwestern United States for almost 4 hours and 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers. The plane ran out of fuel over South Dakota and crashed into a field near Aberdeen after an uncontrolled descent. The Great Smog of London, or Great Smog of 1952, was a severe air pollution event that affected the British capital of London in early December 1952. A period of cold weather, combined with an anticyclone and windless conditions, collected airborne pollutants mostly arising from the use of coal to form a thick layer of smog over the city. It lasted from Friday, December 5 to Tuesday, December 9, 1952, and then dispersed quickly when the weather changed. It caused major disruption by reducing visibility and even penetrating indoor areas, far more severe than previous smog events experienced in the past, called P-supers. Government medical reports in the following weeks, however, estimated that up until December 8, 4,000 people had died as a direct result of the smog and 100,000 more were made ill by the smog's effects on the human respiratory tract. More recent research suggests that the total number of fatalities was considerably greater. About 6,000 more died in the following months as a result of the event. On Monday, September 4, 2000, a chartered Beechcraft 200 Super King Air departed Perth for a flight to the mining town of Leonora, Western Australia. The aircraft crashed near Burketown, Queensland, Australia, resulting in the deaths of all 8 occupants. During the flight, the aircraft climbed above its assigned altitude. When Air Traffic Control, ATC, contacted the pilot's speech had become significantly impaired and he was unable to respond to instructions. 3 aircraft intercepted the Beechcraft but were unable to make radio contact. The aircraft continued flying on a straight heading for 5 hours before running out of fuel and crashing 65 kilometers southeast of Burketown. In 1957, the cooling system in one of the tanks containing about 70 to 80 tons of liquid radioactive waste failed and was not repaired. The temperature in it started to rise, resulting in evaporation and a chemical explosion of the dried waste, consisting mainly of ammonium nitrate and acetates, see ammonium nitrate/fuel oil bomb. The explosion, on September 29, 1957, estimated to have a force of about 70 to 100 tons of TNT, threw the 160-ton concrete lid into the air. There were no immediate casualties as a result of the explosion, but it released an estimated 20 MCI, 800 PBQ, of radioactivity. In the next 10 to 11 hours, the radioactive cloud moved towards the northeast, reaching 300 to 350 kilometers, 190 to 220 miles, from the accident. The fallout of the cloud resulted in a long-term contamination of an area of more than 800 to 20,000 square kilometers, 310 to 7,720 square miles. The Centralia mine fire is a coal seam fire that has been burning underneath the borough of Centralia, Pennsylvania, United States, since at least May 27, 1962. The fire is suspected to be from deliberate burning of trash in a former strip mine. The fire is burning in underground coal mines at depths of up to 300 feet, 90 m, over an 8-mile, 13 kilometers, stretch of 3,700 acres, 15 square kilometers. At its current rate, it could continue to burn for over 250 years. The fire caused most of the town to be abandoned. The population dwindled from around 1,400 at the time the fire started to 7 in 2013, and most of the buildings have been leveled. On April 26, 1942, a gas and coal dust explosion in the Bengzahu colliery mine sent flames bursting out of the mine shaft entrance. Miners' relatives rushed to the site but were denied entry by a cordon of Japanese guards who erected electric fences to keep them out. In an attempt to curtail the fire underground, the Japanese shut off the ventilation and sealed the pit head. Witnesses say that the Japanese did not evacuate the pit fully before sealing it, trapping many Chinese workers underground to suffocate in the smoke. Actions of the Japanese were later blamed by the Soviet Union for needlessly increasing the death toll. It took workers 10 days to remove all the corpses and rubble from the shaft. The dead were buried in a mass grave nearby. Many victims could not be properly identified due to the extent of the burns. The Japanese at first reported the death toll to be just 34. Initial newspaper reports were short, as little as 40 words, and downplayed the size of the disaster as a minor event. Later the Japanese erected a monument to the dead. This stone gave the number of dead to be 1,327. The true number is believed to be 1,549, 34% of the miners working that day, making it the worst disaster in the history of coal mining and the second worst recorded industrial accident. Of this number, 31 were Japanese, the rest Chinese. The Hyatt Regency walkway collapse took place at the Hyatt Regency Kansas City Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri, on July 17, 1981. Two walkways, one directly above the other, collapsed onto a tea dance being held in the hotel's lobby. The falling walkways killed 114 and injured 216. It was the deadliest structural collapse in U.S. history until the collapse of the World Trade Center towers 20 years later. Dr. Joseph Way Curl, former chief of Kansas City's emergency medical system, directed the rescue effort, establishing a makeshift morgue in a ground-floor exhibition area, using the hotel's driveway and front lawn as a triage area and helping to organize the wounded by greatest need for medical care. Those people who could walk were instructed to leave the hotel to simplify the rescue effort. Those mortally injured were told they were going to die and given morphine. Often, rescuers had to dismember bodies to reach survivors among the wreckage. One victim's right leg was trapped under an I-beam and had to be amputated by a surgeon, a task which was completed with a chainsaw. USS Indianapolis. The ship had just finished a high-speed trip to United States Army Air Force Base at Tinian to deliver parts of Little Boy, the first nuclear weapon ever used in combat, and was on her way to the Philippines on training duty. At 0015 on July 30, 1945, the ship was torpedoed by the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine 1-58, and sank in 12 minutes. Of 1,195 crewmen aboard, approximately 300 went down with the ship. The remaining 900 faced exposure, dehydration, saltwater poisoning, and shark attacks while floating with few lifeboats and almost no food or water. The Navy learned of the sinking when survivors were spotted 4 days later by the crew of a PV-1 Ventura on routine patrol. Only 316 survived. Philippine-registered passenger ferry sank after colliding with the MT Vector on December 20, 1987. With a possible death toll of 4,375 people, the collision resulted in the deadliest ferry disaster in history during peacetime. While most of the passengers slept during the night of December 20th, the ferry collided with the Vector, which was carrying 8,800 barrels of gasoline. The impact caused a fire which quickly spread to the Dona Paz, as well as lighting the surrounding water on fire. The life jackets aboard the Dona Paz were reportedly locked up, forcing passengers to jump into flaming shark-infested waters in order to attempt escape. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was a German rocket-powered interceptor aircraft. Designed by Alexander Lippisch, it is the only rocket-powered fighter aircraft ever to have been operational and the first piloted aircraft of any type to exceed 1,000 km per hour, 621 miles per hour in level flight. Its design was revolutionary and its performance unprecedented. German test pilot Heini Dittmar in early July 1944 reached 1,130 km per hour, 700 miles per hour, an unofficial flight airspeed record unmatched by turbojet-powered aircraft for almost a decade. Over 300 aircraft were built, but the Comet proved ineffective in its dedicated role as an interceptor aircraft and was responsible for the destruction of only about 9 to 18 Allied aircraft against 10 losses. Aside from combat losses, many pilots were killed during testing and training. There were some instances of the Me-163's highly volatile rocket fuel leaking into the cockpit of the aircraft and almost completely dissolving the pilot in his seat. Even though he was wearing a protective suit, his entire right arm was dissolved by T-Stoff. It just simply wasn't there. There was nothing more left in the sleeve. The other arm, as well as the head, was nothing more than a mass of soft jelly. The Philadelphia experiment was conducted in 1943 with the goal of making the USS Eldridge invisible to sonar and radar. The problem came when the experiment worked. The ship not only became invisible to radar, but invisible to the naked eye as well. It was gone. Somehow it disappeared, and with it went its crew of 181 sailors. The ship vanished in Norfolk Harbor, Virginia. It reappeared in Philadelphia Harbor a full 24 hours later, but there were problems. Out of a crew of 181, 21 survived, most only to die a short time later, 40 were dead, and 120 never came back. The sinking of MV Swole, Hangul, A. Hanja, also referred to as the Swole Ferry disaster, occurred on the morning of April 16, 2014, when the passenger/RORO ferry was en route from Incheon towards Jeju in South Korea. The Japanese-built South Korean ferry sank while carrying 476 people, mostly secondary school students from Danwon High School, Ansan City. The 6,8 25-ton vessel sent a distress signal from about 2.7 kilometers, 1.7 miles, north of Gyeongpungdo at 8:58 Korea Standard Time, 23:58 UTC, April 15, 2014. In total, 304 passengers and crew members died in the disaster. Of the approximately 172 survivors, more than half were rescued by fishing boats and other commercial vessels that arrived at the scene approximately 40 minutes after the South Korean Coast Guard. The Italian cruise ship Costa Concordia capsized after striking an underwater rock off Isola del Giglio, Tuscany, on January 13, 2012, resulting in 32 deaths. There may have been additional people not listed as on board, so the death toll could possibly be higher. The search for bodies was cancelled at the end of January and resumed after the parbuckling maneuver in September 2013, after which additional remains were found. On September 26, 2013, remains were found on Deck 4, and were reported as being the 2 passengers reported as missing. The following day, the remains were found not to be from the missing passengers. In October 2013, the body of one of the missing passengers was found and confirmed to be that of Maria Grazia Tricarichi. Scuba divers had discovered her body near the third deck of the salvaged ship. On November 29, 1991, winds along 1 to 5 in California reached 40 miles an hour. The usually lush farmlands had been left unplanted due to a severe drought. The wind whipped up a fierce dust storm that seriously cut visibility. This all led to a pile-up of 104 vehicles, including 4 tractor-trailers, along a 1-mile stretch of highway. After hours of rescue efforts in the continuing dust storm, 17 people had died and 150 were seriously injured. The pile-up led to thousands more being trapped in their cars for another day while road crews cleared the wreckage and worked to reopen the highway. Operation Eagle Claw was a United States Armed Forces operation ordered by U.S. President Jimmy Carter to attempt to end the Iran hostage crisis by rescuing 52 embassy staff held captive at the Embassy of the United States, Tehran on April 24, 1980. Its failure, and the humiliating public debacle that ensued, damaged U.S. prestige worldwide. Carter himself blamed his loss in the 1980 U.S. presidential election mainly on his failure to win the release of the hostages. The operation encountered many obstacles and was eventually aborted. 8 helicopters were sent to the first staging area, Desert 1, but only 5 arrived in operational condition. 1 encountered hydraulic problems, another got caught in a hay boob, and the last one showed signs of a cracked rotor blade. During planning, it was decided that the mission would be aborted if fewer than 6 helicopters remained, despite only 4 being absolutely necessary. In a move that is still discussed in military circles, the field commanders advised mission abort, which President Carter accepted and confirmed. As the U.S. force prepared to leave, one of the helicopters crashed into a transport aircraft which contained both servicemen and jet fuel. The resulting fire destroyed both aircraft and killed 8 servicemen. Operation Eagle Claw was one of Delta Force's first missions. The failed operation took on a legendary aspect in the revolutionary Iran, with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, describing the sandstorms causing the failure of the mission as "angels of Allah who foiled a U.S. conspiracy in order to protect Iran." During washing up, On May 17, 2018, Cheryl Stubbins from Bathurst in NSW stepped on a piece of Lego, left unattended by her stepson, Alex, aged 4. An immediate loss of big boy privilege occurred, resulting in approximately 2 liters of spilled tears and a shift in alliances to real mom, foreshadowing a July 2018 attempt to smear POO on the bathroom walls by Alex, now aged 5. The Hillsborough disaster was a human crush at Hillsborough Football Stadium in Sheffield, England on April 15, 1989, during the 1988-89 FA Cup semi-final game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. The resulting 96 fatalities and 766 injuries make this the worst disaster in British sporting history. The crush occurred in the 2 standing-only central pens in the Leppings Lane stand, allocated to Liverpool supporters. Shortly before kick-off, in an attempt to ease overcrowding outside the entrance turnstiles, the police match commander, Chief Superintendent David Duck Enfield, ordered exit gate C to be opened, leading to an influx of even more supporters to the already overcrowded central pens. The nature of disaster in China, the 1931 Yangtze River flood, Cambridge University Press, 2018. The flood inundated almost 70,000 square miles, 180,000 square km, and turned the Yangtze into what looked like a giant lake or ocean. Estimates of the overall death toll vary. Contemporary government numbers put the number of dead at around 2 million, but others, including NOAA, say it may have been as many as 3.7 million people. 1980 Damascus Titan missile explosion, Little Rock AFB, Arkansas, at about 6:30 p.m., an airman conducting maintenance on a U.S. Air Force Titan IL missile at Little Rock Air Force Base's Launch Complex 374-7 in Southside, Van Buren County, just north of Damascus, Arkansas. Dropped a 9 pounds, 4.1 kilograms, socket from a socket wrench, which fell about 80 feet, 24 m, before hitting and piercing the skin on the rocket's first-stage fuel tank, causing it to leak. The area was evacuated. Overnight, at about 3 a.m., the hypergolic fuel exploded. The W-53 warhead landed about 100 feet, 30 m, from the launch complex's entry gate. Its safety features operated correctly and prevented any explosion, chemical or nuclear. An Air Force airman, SRA David Livingston, was killed and the launch complex was destroyed. Approximately 14 Spanish licensed-built Casa 2.111s survive today in various conditions on display or in storage. One modified Spanish 2.111D served as a transport for Spanish VIPs, including General Francisco Franco, before being purchased in England by the Commemorative Air Force in 1977. It remained the last He-111 in flyable condition until July 10, 2003, when it was destroyed in a fatal crash landing. The aircraft was attempting a landing at the Cheyenne Municipal Airport, near Cheyenne, Wyoming, while en route from Midland, Texas to an air show in Missoula, Montana. Eyewitness reports indicate the aircraft lost power to one engine on final approach and plowed through a chain-link fence before colliding with a building under construction. Killed were CAF pilot Neil R. Stamp and co-pilot Charles S. Bates. Another one from Italy, the Vajont disaster. On October 9, 1963, engineers saw trees falling and rocks rolling down into the lake where the predicted landslide would take place. Before this, the alarming rate of movement of the landslide had not slowed as a result of lowering the water, although the water had been lowered to what SADA believed was a safe level to contain the displacement wave should a catastrophic landslide occur. At 10:39 p.m., a massive landslide of about 260 million cubic meters, 340 million CUYD, of forest, earth, and rock fell into the reservoir at up to 110 kilometers per hour, 68 miles per hour, completely filling the narrow reservoir behind the dam. The landslide was complete in just 45 seconds, much faster than predicted, and the resulting displacement of water caused 50 million cubic meters, 65 million CUYD, of water to overtop the dam in a 250-meter, 820 feet, high wave. The flooding from the huge wave in the Piave Valley destroyed the villages of Long Arone, Pirego, Rivalta, Villanova, and Fay, killing around 2,000 people and turning the land below the dam into a flat plain of mud with an impact crater 60 meters, 200 feet, deep and 80 meters, 260 feet, wide. Citation needed many small villages near the landslide along the lakefront also suffered damage from a giant displacement wave. Villages in the territory of Erto e Caso and the village of Codes Sago, near Castellavazzo, were largely wrecked. Estimates of the dead range from 1,900 to 2,500 people, and about 350 families lost all members. Most of the survivors had lost relatives and friends along with their homes and belongings. Citation needed U.S. Army helicopters and paratroopers aided in rescue efforts and bringing in relief supplies. In 300 flights they ferried out 4,000 survivors. The dam was largely undamaged, and still exists today. The 3 Mile Island accident occurred on March 28, 1979, in reactor number 2 of 3 Mile Island Nuclear Generating Station, TMI-2, in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, near Harrisburg. It was the most significant accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power plant history. The incident was rated a 5 on the 7-point International Nuclear Event Scale, accident with wider consequences. The accident began with failures in the non-nuclear secondary system, followed by a stuck-open pilot-operated relief valve in the primary system, which allowed large amounts of nuclear reactor coolant to escape. The mechanical failures were compounded by the initial failure of plant operators to recognize the situation as a loss of coolant accident due to inadequate training and human factors, such as human-computer interaction design oversights relating to ambiguous control room indicators in the power plant's user interface. In particular, a hidden indicator light led to an operator manually overriding the automatic emergency cooling system of the reactor because the operator mistakenly believed that there was too much coolant water present in the reactor and causing the steam pressure release. Louis Alexander Slotin, December 1, 1910, May 30, 1946, was a Canadian physicist and chemist who took part in the Manhattan Project. He was born and raised in the north end of Winnipeg, Manitoba. After earning both his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees from the University of Manitoba, Slotin attended King's College London, where he obtained his doctorate in physical chemistry in 1936. Afterwards, he joined the University of Chicago as a research associate to help design a cyclotron. In 1942, he was invited to participate in the Manhattan Project. As part of the Manhattan Project, Slotin performed experiments with uranium and plutonium cores to determine their critical mass values. After World War II, Slotin continued his research at Los Alamos National Laboratory. On May 21, 1946, Slotin accidentally began a fission reaction, which released a burst of hard radiation. Slotin was rushed to the hospital, and died 9 days later on May 30, the victim of the second criticality accident in history, following the death of Harry Daklian, who had been exposed to radiation by the same core that killed Slotin. Slotin was hailed as a hero by the United States government for reacting quickly enough to prevent the deaths of his colleagues. However, some physicists argue that this was a preventable accident. The accident and its aftermath have been dramatized in several fictional and non-fiction accounts. The Andreef Bay nuclear accident was associated with leaks in a massive cooling and storage pool. The leaks caused about 700,000 tons of highly radioactive water to leak into the Barents Sea during that time period. During the extensive period of attempted repairs and subsequent dismantling of the pool, other incidents occurred on site, including accidental accumulations of critical masses of material releasing radiation in an industrial accident that caused 2 cleanup workers to plunge directly into the radioactive pool. While on duty in the Barents Sea, there was a release of liquid metal coolant from the reactor of the Soviet Project 705 Alpha-class submarine K-123. The accident was caused by a leak in the steam generator. Approximately 2 tons of metal alloy leaked into the reactor compartment, irreparably damaging the reactor, so it had to be replaced. It took 9 years to repair the submarine. About 35 miles, 56 kilometers, from Vladivostok in Chazhma Bay, the Soviet Echo-class submarine K-431 suffered a reactor explosion, producing fatally high levels of radiation. 10 men were killed, but the deadly cloud of radioactivity did not reach Vladivostok. April 10, 1963, loss of nuclear reactor. The submarine USS Thresher sank about 190 nmi east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts due to improper welds allowing in seawater, which forced a shutdown of the reactor. poor design of its emergency blow system prevented the ship from surfacing, and the disabled ship ultimately descended to crush depth and imploded, killing all 129 on board. June 7, 1960, New Egypt, New Jersey, U.S., nuclear warhead damaged by fire. A helium tank exploded and ruptured the fuel tanks of a U.S. Air Force Bomark A surface-to-air missile at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. The fire destroyed the missile, and contaminated the area directly below and adjacent to the missile. A significant increase in airborne radioactivity was detected in Europe in autumn 2017, starting from the last days of September. The source is widely suspected to be in Russia. However, the Russian government denies that any nuclear mishaps occurred that could have causes the radiation spike. The radioactive isotope detected was ruthenium-106. Across Europe, it was found to be in small quantities, from microbecquerels to a few millibecquerels per cubic meter of air, not significant for the health of the population far away from the source. However, it is estimated that the radiation released posed a danger to any employees or residents within several kilometers of the currently unknown source. The path of the tri-state tornado of 1925. The storm covered a distance of over 219 miles in 3% hours, and traveling in excess of 70 miles per hour. Total, 747 deaths and 2,300 injuries. On April 19, 1989, the number 2 16-inch gun turret of the United States Navy battleship USS Iowa, BB-61, exploded. The explosion in the center gun room killed 47 of the turret's crewmen and severely damaged the gun turret itself. Two major investigations were undertaken into the cause of the explosion, one by the U.S. Navy and then one by the General Accounting Office, GAO, and Sandia National Laboratories. The investigations produced conflicting conclusions. The first investigation into the explosion, conducted by the U.S. Navy, concluded that one of the gun turret crew members, Clayton Hartwig, who died in the explosion, had deliberately caused it. During the investigation, numerous leaks to the media, later attributed to U.S. Navy officers and investigators, implied that Hartwig and another sailor, Kendall Truitt, had engaged in a homosexual relationship and that Hartwig had caused the explosion after their relationship had soured. In its report, however, the U.S. Navy concluded that the evidence did not show that Hartwig was homosexual but that he was suicidal and had caused the explosion with either an electronic or chemical detonator. The second impact was a global cataclysm which occurred on September 13, 2000, when a massive explosion occurred in Antarctica which melted the polar cap and even altered Earth's axis. The explosion resulted in massive tsunamis, followed by a dramatic increase in global sea levels which flooded most coastal cities, and caused a catastrophic shift in global weather patterns. 2 billion people in the southern hemisphere were instantly killed by the gargantuan tsunamis which followed the explosion. Many more would die in worldwide coastal flooding. As a result of the subsequent chaos, global wars soon broke out due to food and resource shortages and refugee crises. Civil wars and ethnic conflicts were also widespread. 2 days after the disaster, a nuclear exchange broke out between India and Pakistan over refugee tensions. On September 20, 7 days after second impact, a nuclear bomb was detonated in Old Tokyo, killing 500,000 people. Fighting spread across the world, and only ended on February 14, 2001 when the Valentine Treaty formally put an end to the fighting. By the end of these events, the global human population was halved. Thousands of plant and animal species had also been rendered extinct. The victims' families, the media, and members of the U.S. Congress were sharply critical of the U.S. Navy's findings. The U.S. Senate and U.S. House Armed Services Committees both held hearings to inquire into the Navy's investigation and later released reports disputing the U.S. Navy's conclusions. The Senate committee asked the GAO to review the U.S. Navy's investigation. To assist the GAO, Sandia National Laboratories provided a team of scientists to review the Navy's technical investigation. During its review, Sandia determined that a significant overrun of the powder bags into the gun had occurred as it was being loaded and that the overrun could have caused the explosion. A subsequent test by the Navy of the overarm scenario confirmed that an overarm could have caused an explosion in the gun breech. Sandia's technicians also found that the physical evidence did not support the U.S. Navy's theory that an electronic or chemical detonator had been used to initiate the explosion. In response to the new findings, the U.S. Navy, with Sandia's assistance, reopened the investigation. In August 1991, Sandia and the GAO completed their reports, concluding that the explosion was likely caused by an accidental overrun of powder bags into the breech of the 16-inch gun. The U.S. Navy, however, disagreed with Sandia's opinion and concluded that the cause of the explosion could not be determined. The U.S. Navy expressed regret, but did not offer apology, to Hartwig's family and closed its investigation. The Black Death from 1348 to 1350 killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people. It is believed to have diminished the world's population from 450 million people down to 350 million. In March 1984, a serious radiation accident occurred in Morocco, where 8 people died from pulmonary hemorrhaging caused by overexposure to radiation from a lost iridium-192 source. Other individuals also received significant overdoses of radiation that required medical attention. 3 people were sent to the Curie Institute in Paris for treatment of radiation poisoning. The source was used to radiograph welds and became separated from its shielded container. As the source itself had no markings indicating it was radioactive, a worker took it home, where it stayed for some weeks, exposing the family to radiation. The laborer, his family, and some relatives were the 8 deaths caused by the accident. The Windscale fire of October 10, 1957 was the worst nuclear accident in Great Britain's history, ranked in severity at level 5 out of a possible 7 on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The fire took place in Unit 1 of the 2-pile Windscale facility on the northwest coast of England in Cumberland, now Sellafield, Cumbria. The 2 graphite, moderated reactors, referred to at the time as piles, had been built as part of the British post-war atomic bomb project. Windscale Pile No. 1 was operational in October 1950, followed by Pile No. 2 in June 1951. The fire burned for 3 days and there was a release of radioactive contamination that spread across the UK and Europe. Of particular concern at the time was the radioactive isotope iodine-131, which may lead to cancer of the thyroid, and it has been estimated that the incident caused 240 additional cancer cases. No one was evacuated from the surrounding area, but there was a worry that milk might be dangerously contaminated. Milk from about 500 square kilometers, 190 square miles, of nearby countryside was diluted and destroyed for about a month. A 2010 study of workers directly involved in the cleanup found no significant long-term health effects from their involvement. The Hanford site is a decommissioned nuclear production complex operated by the United States federal government on the Columbia River in the U.S. state of Washington. The site has been known by many names, including Hanford Project, Hanford Works, Hanford Engineer Works and Hanford Nuclear Reservation. Established in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project in Hanford, south-central Washington, the site was home to the B reactor, the first full-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. Plutonium manufactured at the site was used in the first nuclear bomb, tested at the Trinity site, and in Fat Man, the bomb detonated over Nagasaki, Japan. During the Cold War, the project expanded to include 9 nuclear reactors and 5 large plutonium processing complexes, which produced plutonium for most of the more than 60,000 weapons built for the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Nuclear technology developed rapidly during this period, and Hanford scientists produced major technological achievements. Many early safety procedures and waste disposal practices were inadequate, and government documents have confirmed that Hanford's operations released significant amounts of radioactive materials into the air and the Columbia River. The Sampung department store collapse was a structural failure that occurred on June 29, 1995, in the Sokogu district of Seoul, South Korea. The collapse is the largest peacetime disaster in South Korean history as 502 people died and 937 were injured. It was the deadliest modern building collapse until the September 11 attacks in New York City, and the deadliest non-deliberate building collapse until the 2013 Savar building collapse near Dhaka, Bangladesh. The storm began late Sunday night on February 27, 1938. By the second day of rainfall, the official weather forecast reported that Los Angeles and vicinity will be unsettled with rain Monday and probably Tuesday, an understatement for the havoc to come. In 24 hours, by 10:30 p.m., February 28, the average seasonal rainfall in Los Angeles was up to 14.43 inches. In comparison, the normal seasonal amount at that point was 10.88 inches. By the third day of the storm, even heavier rainfall poured down, overwhelming the river from the valley down to Long Beach. The storm would last for 5 days. The powerful force exceeded man's expectations for natural disaster along the river. Major infrastructures collapsed directly in view of bystanders, telephone connections were lost, and lives were taken with the rapidly bulging current. Destruction spread as long and wide as the river. In Universal City, 250 feet of concrete washed away the Lankershim Boulevard Bridge along with a cafe, 10 homes, and the lakeside golf course. On the west side, the waters swallowed 8 square miles of Venice around Venice Boulevard, Washington Street, Brooks Avenue, Trolley Way, and Mildred Avenue. The Red Cross evacuated 800 men, women, and children evacuated in the area early in the morning on March 2. Roman from the canals rescued trapped residents who could not escape in time. Long Beach witnesses saw 10 people, including a small boy, 4 men, 3 sailors, and 2 women, fall into the water with a wooden pedestrian bridge. Pic related for comparison. The disaster killed 144 people and left the county with repairs lasting for years, prompting the plans for ways to control this unpredictable strip of nature. When we think of ways to revitalize the Los Angeles River today, it is important to understand the power of the river, which can be unexpectedly destructive. On May 4, 1988, a conflagration followed by several explosions occurred at the Pacific Engineering and Production Company of Nevada, PEPCON, chemical plant in Henderson, Nevada. The disaster caused 2 fatalities, 372 injured, and an estimated $100 million USD of damage. A large portion of the Las Vegas Valley within a 10-mile, 16 kilometers, radius of the plant was affected, and several agencies activated disaster plans. On April 4, 1585, during the Spanish siege of Antwerp, a fortified bridge named Puente Farnigio had been built by the Spanish on the River Scheldt. The Dutch launched 4 large hellburners, explosive fire ships filled with gunpowder and rocks, to destroy the bridge and thereby isolate the city from reinforcement. 3 of the hellburners failed to reach the target, but one containing 4 tons of explosives struck the bridge. It did not explode immediately, which gave time for some curious Spaniards to board it. There was then a devastating blast that killed 800 Spaniards on the bridge, throwing bodies, rocks, and pieces of metal a distance of several miles. A small tsunami arose in the river, the ground shook for miles around and a large, dark cloud covered the area. The blast was felt as far as 22 miles away in Ghent, where windows vibrated. It has been described as an early weapon of mass destruction. The Tuscaloosa tornado is one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. Links to YouTube regard tornado. Best video of the bunch, some of the most hair-raising footage ever taken of a truly huge, violent twister. The uploader is shitting bricks from about 410 onwards and I don't blame him. Just one parking lot away.